This will sound very strange, but in 2005, NASA launched its Discovery Shuttle, its first shuttle launch since the Columbia Shuttle disaster in 2003, which was caused by a 1-pound piece of foam that hit the wing of the Columbia Shuttle during its launch. And during the launch of this Discovery Shuttle in 2005, a large turkey vulture weighing 3 to 5 pounds collided with the back of the Space Shuttle Discovery's external tank. And as I will explain in this video, this vulture bird strike on NASA's shuttle was a prophecy that is predicting that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, her Air Force Two plane, caused by turbulence, lightning, and a bird strike in St. Louis as she flies across the country on February 10th, 2024. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. As can be seen in this email, the prediction that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash has been known since at least August 5th, 2021. Alright, this is an amazing video that will cover many prophetic signs that won't be explained in other videos that are very, very amazing, important, and inspiring, etc. So make sure you watch all of this video, but I will say that like many of the videos, or a number of them, they were produced long ago. In fact, like many other videos, or a number of other videos, they were produced in early 2021. It has been known since 2020 that Kamala Harris would die in a plane crash, and the way God's signs works is that they are steps in trails of signs, and so when God has pointed to a date in the past, often it was thought that this would be the date that Kamala Harris would die in a plane crash. And so the point is that I made other videos prior to this, and a lot of amazing information will be explained later. However, there is a new trail of signs that has come to light now that we now know what I'm highly convinced will be the end of the trail. October 17th, the predicted date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis. Now that we have this knowledge, we can see more clearly God's puzzle. It's like a puzzle. When you put the puzzle together at the beginning, you are struggling to fit pieces together, right? But as more pieces come to light and are placed together, the bigger picture makes more sense, and the easier further pieces become to place into the puzzle. Speaking of which, this video was originally produced before October 17th, and this diagram you were looking at, as I will explain, is a trail of signs that God was using to point to the date October 17th. It is amazing, and the amazing signs that occurred on October 17th are explained in the must-watch Gaza explosion video, and these signs, which include, among other signs, a Kamala Harris and her Air Force Two plane prophetic sign. This video explains some of the amazing and important prophetic signs that the righteous Christian God of the Bible used to point to October 17th, 2023, regarding the prediction that U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Here is the email and forensic notes document that indicate that the prediction for Harris's plane crash on October 17th, 2023 was known since July 6th, 2023. In fact, it has been known since October of 2020 that Harris will die in a plane crash so that Barack Obama can become the president again. God pointed to October 17th, ahead of October 17th, and so it was believed that Harris's predicted plane crash would be on October 17th. As explained in the Gaza explosion video, the extremely profound prophetic signs that occurred on October 17th, 10/17, revealed adding 3 sets of 7 days to reach November 7th, 11/7. The signs on 11/7 in turn revealed a trail of signs that continued on through other dates, and this trail of signs is predicted to ultimately end on February 2nd or 3rd, 2024. This trail of signs that I am referring to is explained in the must-watch Gaza explosion video. That said, October 17th was the bigger date. October 17th was supremely important, and the signs on 1017 pointed to Zechariah chapter 1 verse 17 in the Bible. The Gaza explosion video explains how the signs on 1017 pointed to Zechariah 1:17. Zechariah 1:17 was also hinted at with the date 11:7, which again was a prophetic 3 sets of 7 days after 1017. Furthermore, from 11:7, the trail of signs regarding Harris's predicted plane crash continued on to the date 1:7, and this too was another hint at Zechariah 1:17. The reason why God used October 17th, the date 1017, to point to Zechariah 1:17 is that this important prophecy in Zechariah chapter 1 in the Bible is dated, and the date of this prophecy is recorded in Zechariah chapter 1 verse 7, 1:7, and the date 1017 also hints at this. The prophet Zechariah recorded the precise date on which he received the prophecy from God. The date was the 24th day of the month of Shavat in the Hebrew calendar. This year in 2024, the 24th day of Shavat begins at sunset on February 2nd and goes to sunset February 3rd. In other words, God used many different profound trails of signs to lead to October 17th, 2023, in order to point to the 24th day of the month of Shavat, which in 2024 begins on February 2nd. On February 2nd, Kamala Harris will visit South Carolina, the 8th state to join the Union. To learn more about the very important prophetic relevance of Harris's visit to the 8th state, watch the important and must-watch Amelia Earhart prophecy video. 8 days after Harris will visit the 8th state will be February 10th, the date on which it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, which will be the anniversary of the shoot-down of the Israeli F-16 fighter jet over northern Israel by Iran and Syria on February 10th, 2018, which was the 24th day of the month of Shavat in 2018. To confirm his signs, patterns, and connections, God pairs the numbers 44 and 23 together, as the Antichrist is the 44th president and the basketball president who wore jersey 23 in high school. Barack Obama will become the president again as a result of the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. 8 days from Harris's visit to the 8th state is the equivalent of 4 plus 4 days, which hints at the number 44. February 10th will be exactly 2 times 3 years after the Israeli F-16 fighter jet was shot down, and 2 times 3 years hints at the number 23, and the F-16 hints at 4 times 4 and the number 44. And so anyway, this shuttle disaster not a disaster, but a bird strike. This bird strike of the NASA shuttle of a Vulture on July 26th, 2005 connects profoundly in this trail of signs to the predicted date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike, which I will explain. Now, the thing is that the reason for NASA in the signs is ultimately the main purpose or the primary prophetic purpose that God has been using NASA for is to point to Apollo 17, which was the last time that an American stepped foot on the moon. The last American to depart from the moon was on December 14th, 1972. And this was exactly 144 weeks after the first state legalized abortion. And 144 is a prophetic number in the Bible regarding specifically the church, the God's faithful, and this was the 50th state, another number that symbolizes the church. Anyway, the main theme of God's big picture of signs is judgment warning for the American Church of Laodicea, which is in a way synonymous with America itself. But anyway, this is the reason for this exact 17 years connection, because the two shuttle disasters occurred almost exactly 17 years apart. In fact, they are commemorated on the same date every year because they occurred basically on the same calendar date. And it was 17 minutes apart because it was pointing to NASA's Apollo 17 and the last time that an American stepped off of the moon, which is symbolic of America's departure from Christ, or God, because the moon symbolizes Christ. The moon is a giant rock, and in the Bible, rock symbolizes Jesus. The sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. Also, in the Bible, the importance of watching for the timing of the moon is symbolized by watching for the timing of the Lord's return through prophetic signs that include moon signs. And the Apollo 17 is why the symbolism in Apollo 17 and America's departure from Christ is the reason why the two space shuttle disasters were almost exactly 17 years apart. And this is also why the two planes exploded in the two towers on 9/11 17 minutes apart. It also points back to Apollo 17 and America's departure from Christ. Okay, so this is why we have this exact 17 years connection in this trail of signs. Now this gets us to this date here, July 26th in 2022. Now, July 26 hints at 726, which is the number in the Bible, or rather in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, that means rapture. God's faithful, if you don't know what the rapture is, it's a prophesied event when God's faithful will instantly disappear and avoid the severe persecution from the Antichrist, and then go to heaven and then return with Jesus at his second coming. And so that's the prophetic significance of this date as well, because it hints at 726th and the 726th word in the concordance, which means rapture. And in the Bible prophecy, it is 144,000 who will be raptured. And again, NASA's Apollo 17 departure from the moon was exactly 144 weeks after the first state to legalize abortion. So anyway, the point is we have this is astounding because we have this 144,000 connection from the state that symbolizes the rapture. In Revelation chapter 12, which depicts the rapture, Revelation chapter 12 is about the rapture. What is described is a woman who is about to give birth. And at the feet of, and so that's why we have a sign in Virginia. But what sign was it? In Virginia on this day was flooding and a severe storm in Virginia at the naval base on the coast. I forget the name of that base now. But the story was about how I think it was 10 Sea Dragon helicopters were damaged with Class A damage, which I forget the dollar value of Class A, but it's multiple millions from what I recall. Maybe it's over $1 million, I forget, but it's Class A damage, and a number of Sea Dragons, I think it was 10, suffered it. If it was 10, that would symbolize the 10 days of testing of Christians, quote unquote Christians, during the end times persecution of the Antichrist. Well, in chapter 12 of Revelation, the Antichrist is symbolized by a dragon. And this was a big deal, and why it was a news story is because there are only 30 Sea Dragon helicopters in that the Navy possesses. And by the way, this was exactly 30 months after the helicopter crash of Kobe Bryant. And Kobe, when you say his name in Hebrew, it sounds like CVD, as in the CVD disease. And the helicopter blades of a helicopter form an X, and that is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, because the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by an X. As in Ezekiel chapter 9, the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described, and in ancient Hebrew, which would have been a Tav mark, and in ancient Hebrew, a Tav is an X in the alphabet. And so that's why God has been using, one reason why God has been using helicopters in his signs is that it symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing for the CVD disease. And you know what I'm talking about. The thing that you can't talk about is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It does not need an additional something, such as an additional technology to go with it, or some sort of false religious worship, or some sort of supposed age of dispensation where it begins after the rapture, and the letters that Jesus wrote to the churches do not apply to Christians today, but only those that are supposedly going to be left behind after the rapture, which is a doctrine called dispensationalism, which is rooted in free grace and also related to Calvinism and sovereign grace, which is Reformed theology, all of which is the Nicolaitan doctrine that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And so the reason why many Christians, quote unquote Christians, have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is because it is in fact one reason, in fact it is judgment for their doctrine, which is this doctrine that I just explained, that they use to tell themselves that the thing isn't the mark of the Antichrist because supposedly the dispensational age and the rapture hasn't happened, etc. It is judgment for that. And then nowhere in the Bible does it say that one can't repent, and the commonly held objections that people have based on their understanding of Bible prophecy are addressed in the snakebite video, so I won't explain it here, but know that when the prediction comes to pass, it will mean that your commonly held objections are incorrect. It is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. But also, God has been using helicopters as symbolism for dragons. And so we have the Sea Dragon helicopter, but it was in Virginia, which hints at the woman giving birth, because in the Revelation chapter 12 sign, which was depicted in the night sky in September of 2017, incorporates the constellation Virgo. And so anyway, that's why the name Virginia. It's also part of this Revelation chapter 12 sign. And again, as I mentioned, it is 144,000 that will be raptured, and Revelation chapter 12 speaks of the rapture. But the story is about how the Navy base had only 12 minutes warning to bring in their helicopters into their hangars to avoid any damage, which wasn't enough time, and it also occurred at the time of a shift change, which was the worst possible time, which means it was designed by God. But it was a 12-minute warning, and 12,000 times 12,000 is what 144,000 is in the Bible. 12 times 12,000. So in the rapture prophecy in Revelation chapter 7, it is 12 times 12,000 that make up the 144,000. And anyway, that's what's hinted at with the 12-minute warning for the helicopters to be brought in. It hinted at 12 times 12,000 minutes in this connection to this NASA sign right here. But also this was the day of the flooding in St. Louis, which is explained in other videos. And that's why it is known that Kamala Harris, or one reason it is known that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis. But it will be due to a bird strike, which is why the bird strike of the NASA shuttle. Okay? And so again, also it connects to this date, which is also July 26th, which is also symbolism for the rapture. So it's amazing. Now, the rapture is an escape. It's an evacuation of God's faithful. And that's why we have this connection to this date here, which was the day of this NASA sign when NASA tweeted its rollout of its Artemis at 11:17 p.m. The 9-hour rollout began at this time. And this is because of a number of reasons, but it also hints at the date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on 10/17. God uses combinations of 1 and 7 for a number of reasons. And one reason is that her plane will crash from a high place. And the 1117th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance is the word for high place, which is Bama. Barack Obama means lightning from high place, literally, in Hebrew. And also, the Antichrist is described in Zechariah chapter 11, verse 17, described as being God's worthless servant. Also, the first instance of the word owl in the Bible is in Leviticus 11:17, and Barack Obama was known for being a night owl, and in contrast with his predecessor, who was known for being an early bird. And so, this is the beginning of the reasons for this 11:17 time, which hints at the Antichrist. This was the Artemis rollout. Artemis hints at, well, it's a woman. So Artemis is named after the woman, but also this is hinting, the plan, the big deal about Artemis, this is a test for Artemis, but the main thrust of the Artemis mission is to put a woman on the moon because of woke politics, which is Antichrist. And but incorporated in this woke feminist politics is abortions. And again, the last time that an American was on the moon was exactly 144 weeks after abortions were first legalized. That is what is hinted at with this NASA sign involving Artemis. Also, it has been said and trumpeted the case that NASA should go back to the moon by 2024, although they are off schedule now. There were a number of extremely prophetic return to the moon in 2024 signs, which were communicating and confirming that the second coming, the return of Lord Jesus Christ, which is symbolized by the moon, who is symbolized by the moon, will be in 2024. Okay? And so, anyway, there is a lot to the signs on this date, which are explained in other videos, so I won't explain it any more than just that. But we are talking about flood symbolism here, right? And in the account of Noah's flood, God gave Noah a 7 days warning to load the ark before the evacuation of Noah and his family, God's faithful, God's servants. And so that's what the rapture is as well. And that's what's communicated with this 7 days connection, because 7 days later, after NASA rolled out Artemis, there was this surprise hurricane that wasn't expected. And NASA didn't have enough time, it takes 9 hours, to roll Artemis back into the hangar. And Hurricane Nicole hit NASA at the Space Kennedy Center. Kennedy hints at Kamala Harris because Kennedy died while in office, and she will die while in office. And they didn't have enough time to, the strongest wind speeds for Hurricane Nicole were recorded at the Kennedy Space Center. In other words, it was a sign directed at Artemis. And also, Hurricane Nicole was a sign communicating judgment for the Nicolaitan doctrine of the American Church of Laodicea, specifically the American Evangelical Church, for its Nicolaitan doctrine, which I just briefly explained. But again, make sure you watch arguably the most important video on this channel, especially if you are a Christian, the video titled 23 Church Signs video. Okay, now the sign here in Hurricane Nicole was a video that went viral of these two sharks swimming in tandem with each other across a flooded road in Hutchinson Beach, Florida. The two sharks hinted at the two antichrists, and in the book of Revelation, the Antichrist is described with a metaphor of a beast, which is what a shark is, coming out of the sea, which is what these sharks did. And it was in Hutchinson Beach because God has been using Hutchinson signs to identify what specifically is the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, which Jesus said he hates, which is the doctrine of Anne Hutchinson, the leader of the free grace, which is dispensationalism, which comes in the package of dispensationalism, free grace doctrine, which is the divisive doctrine that many Christians, in fact, it is widespread within the evangelical church today. Free grace, cheap grace, as another term for it. And God hates this doctrine. It's also Anne Hutchinson was the leader of the antinomianism controversy, otherwise also known as the free grace controversy. And she was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the spiritual founding of America, and then later murdered by Native Indians. Okay? And she almost destroyed the Massachusetts Bay Colony with her and her followers' divisiveness. And that's the nature of the free grace followers today. They are very, very divisive with their doctrine. And one thing that they claim is that if you don't hold their precise intellectual, if you don't agree intellectually precisely with their doctrine, you aren't saved. That's one of the things with free grace and Calvinism. It's all about intellectually holding the correct doctrine in order to be saved, which is why it is nonsense and not anything that the writers, the early church fathers would have agreed with, let alone the apostles. But I'm speaking of those that either knew the apostles or knew someone that did and spoke the original language furthermore. But anyway, I'm not going to go on to a lecture about doctrine here. The Hurricane Nicole was a prophetic sign also. It and Irma earlier in the year paralleled these two hurricanes 6 + 6 + 6 years earlier, which is also 6 times 6 times 6 months, that engendered X's over Florida, which is again symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. And it is uncanny how these two sets of hurricanes parallel each other. In fact, it caused the meteorological world to do a double take and go, what is going on here? And so anyway, there's lots more to that, but that's enough for now. The point is that this is a flood sign as well. And it was 7 days after this. And again, it was a 7 days warning that God gave Noah before the flood. And when was that flood judgment? When did it begin? In Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, which is why we have this exact 11 months and 7 days connection, this astounding connection from this flood sign that also goes back to the flooding in St. Louis, to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris's plane will crash in St. Louis due to a bird strike, which is why ultimately it hints back to NASA and the vulture bird strike. But also, as I said, God uses combinations of 11 and 7, and that's also what 17 hints at. It's one combination that hints at Genesis 7:11 and the beginning of judgment destruction. And furthermore, this connection also is symbolic of this date, another combination of 11 and 7, just like the time of the rollout of the Artemis. And furthermore, also, speaking of Artemis, Harris is known for being an activist for abortion rights. And that's, again, what is hinted at with Artemis and NASA's Apollo 17 mission, which symbolizes America's departure from Christ. Now, the rest of this video is also equally as amazing as what I've just explained, even though it was made before, a couple of years ago, some of it, but it doesn't matter. It's all amazing. All right, now the beginning of this video explained how this date, January 14th, was a step in the trail leading to the date that it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on October 17th, 2023. I explained this at the beginning of the video, but again, this was the day of the 144 horses sign. 144 days after this was June 7th, the day of the border wall of security sign, as I explained, which is in turn 9 plus 9 plus 9 weeks exactly to the death of the air raid coach, who was coach of the year twice and 3 times coach for his conference of the year. Coach of the year for his conference 3 times, which gave us a 2 and 3, which pairs with the 9 plus 9 plus 9 weeks, and then also pairs with the exact 44 weeks from that date, which was December 13th, 2022, to the predicted date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on October 17th. Okay, so I explained all that, and furthermore, once again, the signs that occurred on this date are in the amazing American Pharaoh prophecy video. Now, one thing, as I just explained this sign right here, the signs on this date here, Harris in High Point, but also this was the day of the first flight of the helicopter, NASA's helicopter, and ultimately this is a NASA video. As I have been explaining, this connects with NASA and the bird strike that the shuttle made with the Vulture on this date. So this connects to this NASA sign, and the helicopter is predicted to crash as well. But anyway, this is an extremely important date, and I've explained the extremely important sign. Kamala Harris herself in high place. She's going to crash from a high place. So it is not surprising that we have a direct connection from this date to the date that it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. And that connection is 911 days, which hints at the planes that crashed on 9/11. Furthermore, the planes that crashed on 9/11, the 2 planes that struck the 2 towers on 9/11, struck the towers 17 minutes apart. And the reason why, prophetically, is that it pointed back to the 2 space shuttle disasters that occurred almost exactly 17 years apart. And in fact, they are commemorated on the same date because they occurred almost exactly on the same calendar date. And it was 17 years in between the 2 space shuttle explosions, which hints at the 2 explosions in the 2 towers 17 minutes apart. And all of this is ultimately for the purpose by God to point to NASA's Apollo 17 mission, which was the last time that an American stepped foot off of the moon. America's departure from the moon was symbolic of America's departure from Christ. As the moon is a giant rock, and in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus, and the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. And in the Bible, watching for the timing of the moon is important, and this is symbolized through watching for the timing of the Lord's return through prophetic signs, including moon signs. And so we have all of this connecting to NASA ultimately, and that's why we have this 911 days. And again, the reason for connecting to NASA, including this bird strike, is for the purpose of communicating symbolically America's departure from God. The last time that an American departed the moon. And that date was December 14th, 1972, and that was exactly 144 weeks after abortions were first legalized in the state, the first state to do so, the state that Barack Obama is from, Hawaii, the 50th state, and the number 50 symbolizes the church, as does the number 144. Ultimately, the main theme of God's big picture of signs is judgment warning for the American Church of Laodicea. Make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel. So in conclusion, though, we have this amazing date here, and that gets us exactly with 911 days to October 17th, 2023. We have a trail of signs going on from this date too, but we also have this as well. At the end of this video, I will play a clip that explains a brief clip that explains the trail of signs leading from January 14th, 2022, leading up to October 17th, 2023. Without further ado, here is the amazing video that explains all of these connections to April 19th, which is in turn part of the trail of signs leading to the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash on November 3rd. Well, in fact, it turned out that November 3rd was the penultimate date filled with amazing, profound prophetic signs, which are explained in the most important video, arguably, for the Kamala Harris prediction, which is the 1989 World Series earthquake, also under the title Philadelphia Church Signs Prophecy video. And November 3rd was another step in the trail of signs that is leading to the predicted date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on November 26th. This is going to be an extremely profound and interesting video. The first thing to explain is that God used the two NASA shuttle disasters, the Columbia shuttle disaster and the Challenger disaster, to point to 9/11. How did he do this? The two disasters were almost exactly 17 years apart. In fact, they are commemorated on the same day every year, February 1st. Columbia, God uses as symbolism for America, and this Columbia shuttle disaster was almost exactly 17 years after the Challenger disaster, which are two planes, and they both involved explosions, fiery explosions, 17 years apart. And this is pointing to the two planes that struck the two towers 17 minutes apart. And the number 17 is a very important number in God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. Because, for one thing, it is pointing to this 17 minutes of this 9/11 judgment warning, the big judgment warning. The 17 minutes are crucial in this because they are the 17 minutes in this second witness sign. After the first plane struck the North Tower, the world watched on live television in confusion as to whether the strike was an accident or terrorism. Then, as the whole world watched live and in shock and horror, 17 minutes later, it was confirmed that it was an act of terrorism and an act of evil when the South Tower was struck. And that's why it is 17 years between these two shuttle disasters, and also a second witness to this. And the Bible says that second and third witnesses are required to confirm a matter. The piece of foam that struck the wing of the Columbia shuttle on its launch that caused it to crash when it returned into the atmosphere weighed 1.7 pounds. And that hinted at the number 17 as well, which was pointing to the 17 years that had lapsed since the Challenger disaster. Speaking of the Challenger disaster, before I forget, the Challenger disaster was originally supposed to have the Sesame Street character Big Bird on its flight, if you can believe that. That is amazing. Other videos on this channel have demonstrated how God has used Big Bird and Sesame Street and the actor that played Big Bird in his big picture of signs to point to the upcoming plane crash of Kamala Harris that will be caused by a bird strike. And so Big Bird was originally supposed to fly on Challenger, and that got canceled. He was going to be the first civilian as well, by the way. But that got canceled, and then they put the school teacher on the Challenger, and tragically she lost her life. But I believe the story is that they canceled it because the character was just too big for the flight or something. But it's a legitimate story, and that was a part of NASA's plan. They were going to, teach children from space or something. So what also confirms this is that 33 years after the Challenger disaster, on February 1st every year, these two shuttle disasters are commemorated. 33 years later, on February 1st, 2019, Flight 33 from Los Angeles Airport, LAX, to Hawaii returned 3 times to LAX due to 3 separate mechanical issues. The flight model was, I believe, an Airbus 330 as well, but it was Flight 33 that returned 3 times for 3 separate mechanical issues 33 years exactly after the Challenger disaster. And the flight was in the air for a total of 390 minutes. I calculated it. It was 390 minutes. And the 390th word in the Greek New Testament is the word for return. And so this flight returned 3 times, and it's all pointing to the return of Lord Jesus Christ, because this word return in the Bible is used when James quotes Amos 9:10 in the Old Testament, which speaks about the Lord returning to rebuild his temple. And so that's why the number 390 symbolizes return in God's signs, and there's other examples of that, many. It's a very important number, but this flight was 390 minutes in the air, and it returned 3 times. So that's confirmation. It was 33 years after the Challenger shuttle disaster. What is amazing, let's go to the diagram now. So if we see here in the bottom left, the relevance of this, the reason why I started to explain that is because, well, to understand the shuttle prophetic signs, you need to understand that they're pointing to 9/11. And that's why it is exactly 9 years and 11 months from this vulture strike in 2005 to this prophetic sign here, which is also pointing to 9/11, as I will explain. It's 119 months exactly, and that is 9 years and 11 months. And, well, the number 119 is 7 times 17, which hints at Genesis 7:17, which is the beginning of the flood judgment. And at the end of the flood judgment is God's sign regarding judgment, the rainbow. And that's why it's exactly 119 months, which is 7 times 17 months, to this rainbow sign here, which was the day that the Supreme Court voted in favor of legalizing gay marriage, and Barack Obama lit up the White House in rainbow colors. And so the rainbow is God's sign regarding judgment, and the use of the rainbow by the spiritual rebellers is a poking of God in the eye. It's a mocking of God, and that's also why the parades are called pride parades, because in the Bible, pride is the root of sin. But so anyway, also, not only was the White House lit up in rainbow colors, but the One World Tower was lit up in rainbow colors, and that's pointing to the 9/11 judgment, and that's a mocking of that judgment warning, which was what 9/11 was, as has been explained many times in other videos on this channel. And so that's how we get the relevance of this 9/11 connection to this 9 years and 11 months, to the space shuttle signs, which is also 9/11 symbolism. And that's how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming the matter. Otherwise, this is just delusional. And so this is what makes this different than other things that are out there. Okay, this is so the Bible says that 2 or 3 witnesses are required to confirm a matter, and that's how all of these connections work. You'll see it's truly amazing. Now, this sign here occurred on the 9th day of the month of Tammuz in the Hebrew calendar, which is the day that the Babylonians breached the walls of security, which is what 9/11 was symbolizing as well. Jesus' official arrival into Jerusalem and first coming was on the 10th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. This is 110, and this hints at the number 110. In the book of Joshua, the date on which the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan River and officially entered the Promised Land was also on the 10th day of the first month, which is 110, and hints at the number 110. Jesus' first coming is symbolized by the number 110. This is why on 9/11, the 2 towers that collapsed were each 110 stories high. The collapse of 2 towers that were 110 floors was symbolism for Jesus' second coming. In the book of Joshua in the Bible, Joshua died at the age of 110. Joshua led the Hebrews around the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in judgment. On 9/11, the Twin Towers, which were 110 stories high, collapsed, engendering a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, on Wall Street. President George Washington was a founding father, and his inauguration as the first president was a symbolic founding of the nation. The cracking of the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street on 9/11 symbolized America's foundation in God being cracked. This is because after Washington's inauguration at Federal Hall, he then walked down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its blessings. After 9/11, Trinity Chapel was called the Miracle Chapel, as it was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived. It did not even suffer a broken window due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted as it sheltered the chapel from the falling debris. In commemoration of this sycamore tree outside the chapel, today there is a huge bronze statue of its roots. In other words, through the 9/11 events, God was pointing to Trinity Chapel and Washington's covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. Wall Street is named after the original 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. The collapse of 110 floors that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which is named after a 9-foot-high security wall, hints at 9/11 and points to Joshua, who died at 110, and the Hebrews that marched around the walls of security before they collapsed in judgment. 110 floors and the 9-foot-high wall of security that was Wall Street points to George Washington's march down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel that symbolized a covenantal relationship between America and God. To this effect, Washington's march down Wall Street with the New York Stock Exchange, the building that symbolizes America's financial strength, located on one side of the street, and Federal Hall, the building that symbolizes America's governmental and institutional strength on the other side, also pointed to the cutting rights ritual practiced in ancient Israel that was used in Abraham's and God's ritual walk in their covenant that is described in Genesis 15. A covenant that symbolizes Washington's walk down Wall Street and his covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded not on ethnicity or territory or language, but were founded solely for God, Israel and America. In every daily Bible that is divided into 365 readings, a portion of the Bible for each day of the year, on every September 11th, everyone that reads this standard 365-day Bible reads the passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 11, which is the judgment warning on ancient Israel, which was a raid on ancient Israel by the world's first recorded terrorists, the ancient Assyrians. And the terrorists on 9/11 were from the same part of the world. The Assyrians raided the northern kingdom of Israel first, and then later the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, which is why the terrorists on 9/11 hit the North Tower first, followed 17 minutes later by the South Tower. And this Isaiah 9:11 passage includes a mention of collapsed buildings and uprooted sycamore trees. On the morning after 9/11, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle gave a speech to the world regarding the events on 9/11. He quoted the passage in Isaiah 9:11, not realizing it was a judgment warning on the ancient Jews. He quoted how, after the raid by the Assyrians, the Hebrews did not repent to God, but instead vowed defiantly to rebuild and become stronger than before. And so, like the ancient Jews, America did not repent after the judgment warning, and instead defied God even more, And so, like ancient Israel, America will now be destroyed. This is why, in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, he frequently pairs together the number 110 and the number 9. Both of these numbers symbolize God's judgment on the nation, and paired together, these numbers point to the big judgment warning that was 9/11. As well, these numbers paired together in God's signs and connections serve as a witness confirmation that the perceived signs and connections are from God. After the judgment warning of 9/11, America was given a period of grace to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment destruction. In the Bible, a 20-year period symbolizes a complete period of waiting. Jacob waited 20 years to get possession of his wives and property. The children of Israel waited 20 years to be freed of Jabin, the king of Canaan, when they were freed from bondage by Deborah and Barak. The Ark of the Covenant waited 20 years in Kiriath-Jearim, and Solomon spent 20 years building his home and the house of God. On the 20th anniversary of the buildings that collapsed on 9/11 was the sudden collapse of America's presence in Afghanistan, and the iconic scene of this was the U.S. Air Force plane leaving the airport in Afghanistan, and the big number on the side of its plane is 1109, which hints at 110 and 9. So anyway, the number 9 is relevant because of the 9-foot-high wall of security and the 110 floors. And that's why from the 9th of Tammuz here, we have 110 weeks connection exactly. So again, second and third witnesses bringing us to the next connection, right? God pairs the numbers 9 and 110 in his signs to confirm the signs, and like I'm demonstrating here. Otherwise, it's just random, delusional, arbitrary connections. Okay, so 110 is one of the 3 most important numbers. So is the number 9. They both symbolize judgment. Joshua, who led the Hebrews around the walls of security before they collapsed, died at the age of 110. That's why the Twin Towers were 110 stories high. So we're still in 9/11 here. Even way back, we started with the NASA shuttle disasters, which were 9/11 signs, and so we're still with 9/11 symbolism. And this 110 weeks connects to the day that the One World Tower was lit up in rainbow colors. 110 weeks exactly is even especially prophetic, if you will, because Joshua led the Hebrews around the walls of security before they collapsed in judgment 7 times while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. So it's a 3 sets of 7, which parallels the 3 sets of 7 in the book of Revelation in the end times. But 110 weeks is 110 times 7 days. And so that's why 110 weeks connections are especially prophetic. And it's exactly 110 weeks exactly from this rainbow over the White House being lit up in the rainbow to the day of the double rainbow over the White House that Trump tweeted about. And the Hebrews, they blew trumpets. And one last trumpet sound before the walls of security collapsed. And that's why God uses trump, which in archaic English means trumpet and the sounding of a trumpet. He uses trump to trumpet and highlight his signs and to confirm his signs. And so Trump sounded the trumpet when he tweeted. That's what his tweets are. They're sounding of the trumpet. And that's why he tweeted about the white double rainbow over the White House 110 weeks exactly after the Obama rainbow. And this is another thing, another second witness here is because God juxtaposes Trump with Obama. Now, these two are diametrically opposed for prophetic reasons. God gave each of these men their personalities for the reason of testing people, to judge rightly and not by appearances, as Jesus warned in the Bible. And so that's why Obama everyone loves, and he's got the smooth, wisecracking at times personality, and Trump is who he is. But we need to look beyond the surface and understand spiritually what's going on. Okay, and so anyway, this is just one example of God juxtaposing Trump with Obama. There's another example, just for example, when Obama went to Bethlehem, he had to cross, because of a freak windstorm out of Saudi Arabia, he couldn't fly his helicopter and he had to drive through the wall of security separating Jerusalem from the West Bank. And that was wall symbolism. Wall symbolism is very prophetic in the Bible and judgment, right? It was a wall of security. And that was exactly 50 months before Trump was the first president to visit the Western Wall in Jerusalem. First sitting president to do so. Okay, so what we have here from this rainbow, which is, again, a mocking of God, we have a 6 + 6 + 6 months connection, which is Antichrist symbolism, to this extremely Antichrist Super Bowl, which I won't even touch upon because I've just explained it so many times in other videos, and it just takes a while to explain, and I wouldn't even do it justice. So we'll leave it at that. You need to watch the other videos. But also a reminder is that on this same day as this prophetic Antichrist Super Bowl, which was the Goat versus Ram Super Bowl, Daniel chapter 8, was the day of the big Amazon commercial starring Harrison Ford. And God is using Harrison Ford to point to the plane crash of Kamala Harris.
And that's why Harrison Ford is known for his aviation hobby. He narrated, for example, the IMAX movie Airplanes, or the Age of Airplanes. And also, coincidentally, his career is filled with him in the role of a pilot. And I've listed the roles of him as a pilot in other videos. And also, Harrison Ford is infamous for his aviation mishaps. Harrison Ford starred in this Amazon commercial as himself, and this commercial regarded a blackout, a worldwide power outage. And the prophetic significance of this is explained in the absolute must-watch, one of the most amazing videos on this channel, the Jeopardy Trebek prophecy video. In part 2, there's two parts to that, and but this was pointing to the power outages and blackouts that will be a result of the coming solar flare storm, catastrophic solar flare storm that's coming.
And that's why on this same day we had the Harris tweet, Kamala Harris, for the senator from California at this point, tweeting about the plane crash that occurred, and Harrison Ford is known for his aviation mishaps, by the way. She tweeted about this plane crash in Yorba Linda, California, the home and museum of the library of President Richard Nixon, who used the 25th Amendment to appoint Gerald Ford, the only president to serve without having been elected vice president or president, just like Barack Obama will be when he replaces Kamala Harris through the 25th Amendment, thus overcoming the 22nd Amendment's restriction on someone being elected to the office more than twice and through being appointed instead. And that's why God was pointing to Yorba Linda with this plane crash on this extremely prophetic day, this Antichrist Super Bowl. This is just amazing here. I should probably show video of that plane crash and her tweet. But
the reason why Harris's tweet is relevant is because she is was at the time, the senator representing California, and this plane crash was in California. And that's why her tweet was national news regarding her condolences, etc., for this plane crash. And this is why this tweet is prophetically, symbolically relevant.
Moving on, it's 666 days, which parallels the 6 + 6 months. So that's the second witness confirming these two connections. They confirm each other, right? 666 days after this to this Kamala Harris plane sign. This was the day the media was reporting all over, everywhere, the interview that Glenn Close gave regarding her comments on her role as the female vice president in the movie starring Harrison Ford, Air Force One. She said that the directors had asked her to portray a weak and crying vice president, and she refused to do so. She didn't want to portray a weak female vice president for political reasons or whatever. And the news articles all mentioned Kamala Harris because, of course, at this point, she is the first female vice president just after the election here.
So that's why it was a big news story. It was partly because of the Kamala Harris connection. And so she will crash in her Air Force too, and that's why this is a major sign. And it connects with this Harris tweet. It's the plane crash tweet. It's amazing. All right, now, it is exactly from this 117 days to this Passover signs here. Why is this important? Well, God uses the number 117 in profound instances because it's pointing to the 117th Congress during which the Antichrist will come to power. The 117th Congress began on January 3rd, 2021. And what's proof of this, a second witness to this 117 days connection, is that on this Passover, the sign we received was the epic flooding in Nashville, which is explained in other videos, especially the must-watch The Lion King prophecy video. That's a must-watch. And the importance of Nashville is explained there, and so I won't explain it again. But one of the things about Nashville is that it was the only major U.S. city to be wholly within the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse Judgment Warning sign, which peaked over the center of the country and Nashville at 1:17 p.m., which hinted at the number 117 and the 117th Congress. And that's why it's truly astounding that we have, back from this Nashville sign, a 117 days connection. Also, in other videos, I demonstrate how 47 days, 47 weeks, and 47 months connection back from Nashville are pointing to the other Nashville signs. So the 47th president will be the Antichrist. 47 weeks exactly back was the derecho storm in Nashville, which is explained in the other video, in the Lion King prophecy video. And exactly 47 months, that was May 3rd, 2020. And exactly 47 months before that was the day that the Thunderbird Blue Angels jet crashed in Nashville, killing the pilot, on the same day that the Thunderbird's jet crashed in Colorado, precisely after it flew directly over Barack Obama, giving his commencement speech to the Air Force. Both of these planes were number 6 in their squads. These ceremonial jets are not supposed to crash, and they both crashed on the same day. And that was the beginning of the 6th month in 2016. And on. There's more, of course, connections and confirmations to that. But the point is that this connects back to a plane crash. Also, this day of this flooding in Nashville connects with so much else that's related to the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. It was, in other words, a major day. It was exactly 23 weeks after the Harrisonburg explosion, 216 weeks, which is 6 times 6 times 6, after the prophetic 3-28 Super Bowl, which is one of the most amazing videos on this channel. It's a must-watch, and the symbolism in that, contained in that, is amazing. That points to the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. Also, this was exactly 44 years, hinting at the 44th president after the deadliest aviation accident in all of history, when 2 passenger planes collided with each other on the runway in Tenerife in the Canary Islands, and on and on. In this Nashville flooding here on Passover, it was 4 deaths, and it was the 4th tragedy to befall Nashville in the last year, after the Christmas bombing and the derecho sign, and also the tornado last March. All extremely prophetic signs. 25 deaths in that tornado, by the way, which was hinting at the 25th Amendment, speaking of Kamala Harris and the usage of the 25th Amendment to bring about her replacement, Barack Obama. That tornado in Nashville was exactly 23 weeks, which I'll explain why the number 23 is extremely prophetic in a second and reveals the identity of the Antichrist. It was exactly 23 weeks before Biden announced that Harris would be his vice president running mate on August 11th, 2020. Well, it was 25 deaths. In the tornado, 4 substations, power substations, were knocked out, knocking out the power for 44,000 people. These were the numbers in the news story. And it was 25 deaths, and on the same night as this was the prophetic huge fireball that flew over the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., which was confirmation that the 25th Amendment, which will be used to bring in the Antichrist, to appoint the Antichrist after Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash as her replacement, during the 117th Congress. And again, Nashville hints at the number 117 because the eclipse peaked at 1:17 p.m. So you can see how God communicated a very profound message through the tornado in Nashville. But anyway, that's enough said about that. So on this day also, we had the Satan shoes sign, which was the controversy that erupted this day in the social media and the mainstream news regarding the release of these Satan shoes by the famous rapper. 666 pairs sold for $1,018 each, and the shoes on them themselves make a reference to Luke 10:18, which is what the price 1,018 was the point of. And the passage of Luke 10:18 is when Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And that's exactly what Kamala Harris's fall from the sky in a plane crash will symbolize, which will give rise to the Antichrist. And the number 23 God uses to reveal the identity of the Antichrist because the basketball president wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. God uses the number 23 to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. In the Old Testament in the Bible, it is described how 2 goats were used on the Day of Atonement in the ritual on the Temple Mount. In Bible prophecy, there are 2 antichrists, and in Bible prophecy, it is said that the Antichrist will rule the Temple Mount during the end times period. And the Antichrist will be vanquished from the Temple Mount at the return of Lord Jesus Christ on the Day of Atonement in 2024. Goat is Antichrist symbolism. Goat stands for greatest of all time. And this is why the 2 goats of basketball wore jersey number 23, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. The GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, played for Chicago, and the GOAT Antichrist, the basketball president, is from Chicago. LeBron James is famous for being from Cleveland and having played for Cleveland and having won the NBA Finals championship for Cleveland, breaking the supposed Cleveland sports curse, which is Antichrist King symbolism, which is why LeBron James goes by the nickname King James. And this was used to point to the president Grover Cleveland, who was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, skipping the 23rd presidency, just like the Antichrist will serve non-consecutive terms, having skipped the 45th presidency. In God's true big picture of end times signs, patterns, and connections, the number 9 is the most important number, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number, and the number 45 is the 9th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 9th row is 45. This is why Michael Jordan, in the exact middle of his career, after having won 3 NBA titles and before winning his other 3 NBA titles, retired briefly, and when he returned, wore jersey number 45 for coincidentally 23 games. And it is why Michael Jordan, in his last game as a Chicago Bull, another city God uses to point to the Antichrist, who is also from Chicago, scored 45 points against the team from the 45th state. Like Michael Jordan, LeBron James also played in Cleveland, then famously left Cleveland in much controversy, and then returned again to play a second time in Cleveland in order to win the championship for Cleveland and break the Cleveland sports curse, which symbolizes the Antichrist curse of Barack Obama when he will return to the White House for his second presidency. In other words, the hiatus in the middle of Michael Jordan's career in Chicago and the hiatus in the middle of LeBron James's career in Cleveland hint at the hiatus of Barack Obama skipping the 45th presidency and returning to the White House for a second presidency. It will be his 3rd term, which is why Michael Jordan won 3 championships and then briefly retired before returning a second time to win 3 more championships. It is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 48th president on November 19th or November 21st, 2023, a few days after it is predicted that Michelle Obama will become the 47th president on November 13th. God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together in order to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school and became president in 2009, and will become the president again in 2023. From the Bible, the numbers 9 and 23 both symbolize judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number. The only grandfather-grandson presidents were the 9th and 23rd presidents, William and Benjamin Harrison. The 9th president, William Harrison, died on the calendar date April 4th, 44, which hints at the 44th president. Harrison died exactly 1 month after his inauguration. The name Harrison hints at Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike and lightning and turbulence in St. Louis on October 17, 2023. And the Antichrist Barack Obama will rise to power and become president again through her replacement, which is what is hinted at with the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, President Grover Cleveland, who skipped the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. The 23rd president, which is why LeBron James, who played for Cleveland, wore jersey number 23. Michelle Obama will first replace Kamala Harris, and then Barack will replace Michelle. Michelle is the feminine version of Michael, which is the reason for the name Michael in the name Michael Jordan. In the Bible, the Hebrews crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Barack Obama's famous autobiography is named A Promised Land. Obama the Antichrist will promise the world a new world order utopia. A goat is Antichrist symbolism. The greatest of all time, the GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, wore jersey number 23 and jersey number 9 when he played for the U.S. Olympic Dream Team, a team that beat their opponents by an average of 44 points per game, which hints at the 44th president, GOAT Antichrist, that wore jersey number 23 and became president in 2009. If you have not already watched the Michael Jordan prophecy video on this channel, the Michael Jordan prophecy video is an essential video for foundational understanding of how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. Besides revealing the identity of the Antichrist, God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 to reveal what the mark of the Antichrist is. Bible prophecy describes a mark of the Antichrist, which if one takes, they will go to hell, and if one doesn't take it, they won't be able to buy or sell, which means they won't be allowed to buy the rationed food that will be rationed due to the coming food shortages. Ezekiel chapter 9 is the chapter that describes the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist. In other words, the 9th chapter of the book of Ezekiel in the Bible is about the mark of the Antichrist, and the mark of the Antichrist involves changing one's chromosomes. And we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. God pairs 9 and 23 to identify what the mark of the Antichrist is. And speaking of the GOAT of basketball, LeBron James, who wears jersey number 23, he gave his name, LeBron James, to a Nike shoe that is named 23 chromosomes. The pattern on the shoe is unmistakably a pattern that resembles snakeskin, and that is because the mark of the Antichrist is a snake bite. The mark of the Antichrist changes chromosomes through inserting a protruding-shaped amino acid chain, and this protruding-shaped amino acid chain is synthesized snake poison. In the Bible, the biggest symbol of evil, of Satan, is the serpent.
The reason why the shoe is made by Nike and why Michael Jordan is known for his Air Jordan shoe made by Nike is that Nike hints at the Nicolaitan doctrine that the vast majority of Christians have, especially evangelical Christians. This Nicolaitan doctrine of our day that Jesus said he hates in Revelation chapter 2, and that he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. This explains why many quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist. It is judgment for their doctrine. That said, nowhere in the Bible does it say that one cannot repent after taking the mark of the Antichrist.
So the basketball president wore jersey number 23, and 23 days after these basketball Satan shoes on this Passover was the day that Kamala Harris visited an electric bus company in High Point, North Carolina, while promoting her and Biden's $2.3 trillion infrastructure and jobs package. The $2.3 trillion hints at the number 23, which is a second confirmation to the 23 days that connects with the basketball Satan shoes. The reason why it is an electric bus company is because this symbolizes lightning, and High Point symbolizes heaven. Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And in Isaiah chapter 14, it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place, which is a metaphor for heaven. Also, in ancient Israel, the Jews would conduct their false idolatrous worship on the top of mountains, which was referred to in the Bible as the high places. So, as was just explained, God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections and to point to the Antichrist, Barack Obama. And this 2.3 trillion hints at the number 23, which again confirms this 23 days connection. But this day also was exactly 9 years, which pairs with this 23. It was exactly 9 years back to April 19th in 2010 when Vice President Joe Biden had to make an emergency landing in his Air Force Two plane in California, the state that Harris represented as senator, after his plane struck a bird. It was an emergency landing due to a bird strike, and it was exactly 9 years before Kamala Harris was in High Point visiting an electric bus company, which is hinting at when her plane will be struck by a bird, which will symbolize Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And this exact 9 years pairs with this 2.3 trillion. Also, the number 9 is the most important number in God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, as from the Bible it symbolizes judgment. 9 years connections are extremely prophetic in general. So also, this day here is 3 sets of 90 days. The number 90 God uses to symbolize the number 9, which connects with this 2.3, which hints at the number 23. It's exactly 3 sets of 90 days to the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. What is another second witness confirmation to that is that 90 days after she was in High Point was the 9th of Av in the Hebrew calendar and the day of another prophetic plane crash, which is explained in the Field of Dreams prophecy video and one of the most important videos on this channel, which is the Return of the King prophecy video. The Lord of the Rings Return of the King movie. Of course, these titles are about much more than just the titles, right? But anyway, it's the theme of the Return of the King. And so there we have this connection from Harris's visit to High Point to the day that she will crash in her plane. All right. So now, as I said earlier, 119 months is 7 times 17 months, which is Genesis 7:17 symbolism, Noah's flood, which is why the rainbow connection is relevant. One reason, right? So it's Noah's flood symbolism. And what we have as another second witness is the number 150 is from Noah's flood as well, because the flood lasted for 150 days. And so we have 150 months from this extremely prophetic sign here of the vulture bird strike of the NASA shuttle. Also, importantly, 150 months is 4,567 days. And the 4,567th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for Satan. This is why God uses 150 months connections, which are, in fact, 4,567 days connections. And that's why this connection is extremely prophetic. To the day of the mysterious windstorm, and when I say mysterious, I mean scientists were baffled, and there are theories. It's interesting to read about if you're interested in that sort of scientific thing. But it was 100 trees that fell in Olympic National Park in Washington State. Washington symbolism, the main theme, one of the main themes in God's big picture of signs is this Washington symbolism. It's a national park. Washington symbolizes America, and so does this national park. And there was this windstorm, a freak, unexplainable windstorm that toppled 100 old-growth trees. These old-growth trees, which had been around since the founding of the nation, which is symbolism here, these old-growth trees were snapped like twigs. And the scientists were baffled, and they still are, as to how this happened. In the Bible, fallen trees symbolize spiritual death and judgment. Okay, so this is a judgment warning on America. Okay, and the number 120 is another number God gave Noah regarding the timing of the impending judgment. It's a Noah's flood number as well, and so this is a second witness to the 150, to the other Noah's flood symbolism, right? 120 days exactly after this was Pentecost. Now, this is a second witness too, because on the first Pentecost, it was 120 disciples in the upper room that were waiting for the Holy Spirit and the tongues of fire to come down. When the tongues of fire came. So that's why this is a second witness to the 120 days connection. This was an extremely prophetic Pentecost. It is one of the most, if not the most, crucial, important date in God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. So much comes out of this, so much learning came out of this date. It's difficult to even explain, but this is just one small slice of it, these connections here. Okay, I'll just briefly go through what happened, the prophetic signs. It's just amazing, but I plan to repost the video of the stunning parallel of signs with the timing of events in the book of Joshua that occurred on this Pentecost. This stunning parallel of signs leading up to the symbolic day that the walls of security collapsed in judgment on Jericho on Pentecost in the Trail of Signs here. So, in other words, this Pentecost was symbolism for the countdown, which was paralleling the Omer count, among other things. So, the sign we received, one of them, first of all, was the collapse of the wall, the retaining wall, in the upper parking lot, which hinted at the upper room on Pentecost, as I just mentioned, was the upper parking lot retaining wall in Chimney Rock State Park collapse. So, which is just amazing because it was a parallel of signs with the timing of events in the book of Joshua to the day, the symbolic day when the walls of security collapsed. The walls of security collapsed, right? Okay, and it was the upper parking lot. And it was Chimney Rock, and in the Bible, rock symbolizes Jesus. So that's why it was a very prophetic sign.
And Joshua died at the age of 110, and 110 days after this Chimney Rock sign was the day that the chimney collapsed onto a driveway, killing one person, the 16-year-old that was in his minivan with his friends after he had just returned from getting his driver's license. This teenager, the bill was passed in Congress in Washington, D.C., named after him. It was the result, the collapsed chimney was the result of the Columbia gas explosions in Boston. God uses the name Columbia to symbolize America. And that in turn was 40 days. 40 days symbolizes from Noah's flood that lasted for 40 days to the double rainbow at the beginning of the World Series in Boston, and on and on.
God's big picture of signs is an infinite interconnected web. But I just wanted to just mention that because I think that's very creative of God, although it's a tragedy. The chimney falling 110 days after the Chimney Rock sign. And of course, Pentecost again was the parallel of signs with the timing of events in the book of Joshua, and the walls of security collapsed in Jericho after Joshua and the Hebrews went around the walls of security. And that's why 110 days between these two collapse signs. Another sign we received was the epic flooding in Ellicott, Maryland, in the historic downtown. And one of the downtown streets was the Old Columbia Pike. And I'll explain why that's relevant. Well, I'll just explain now. So this Pentecost was 40 weeks exactly after the Great American Eclipse Judgment Warning sign. And the path of totality went over all of the epicenters of the earthquake seismic hot zones in the U.S. And Jesus, when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, he used the metaphor of birth pains in context of earthquake signs. And according to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. And so that's why from the earthquake sign that was the Great American Eclipse, because of its passing over all of the epicenters of the earthquake hot zones, 40 weeks later is this extremely prophetic Pentecost and the Old Columbia Pike. Well, a second witness to that is because exactly 40 weeks after this was the tornado outbreak in the southern U.S. on March 3rd, 2019, which paralleled the path of Tecumseh Sherman, the general, which ended in Columbia, South Carolina. Well, this path of tornadoes ended, which was on the 33rd parallel, which is where the exit of the path of totality was too, of the eclipse. But it ended with a tornado in Columbia, South Carolina, which knocked out the pillar, leaving 3 pillars left of the church, the evangelical church, which ultimately made this a judgment warning for the American evangelical church, which is the main theme of God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. You need to watch the Big Picture of Signs Part 1 of this on this channel. That's the absolute must-watch. Well, there's many, but you need to absolutely watch the Big Picture of Signs Part 1 of this channel. It'll explain more on what I'm talking about regarding the main theme of God's big picture of signs, okay? Which is judgment warning for the American Evangelical Church of Laodicea due to its doctrine and works. Nicolaitan doctrine and works, which Jesus said he hates, and he's coming to make war with the sword of his mouth with those that hold and teach this doctrine. Okay, so anyway, so Columbia, because it was Old Columbia Pike in Ellicott to Columbia, South Carolina. 40 weeks forward, 40 weeks back, okay? I hope you got that. Now this epic flooding was a once in 1,000 years flooding. That's literally what they called it. It was a once in 1,000 years flooding. But the big coincidence was that it was a second one in a couple of years, because exactly 666 days before this once in 1,000 year flooding in Ellicott was another once in 1,000 years flooding in Ellicott. And so after the second one, the residents were like, well, we don't know what to do anymore. Is there any point in rebuilding a second time, right? So and it was 666 days exactly that separates the two, which is confirmation, of course, that these are prophetic signs. Now, this was the result, this once in 1,000 years flooding was the result of what meteorologists called train storms. In other words, thunderstorms lined up like a freight train going over a particular area, just dumping tons of water on the one area, right? It's called a training. The storms are called training or training. I think it's training. But the big coincidence here is that Ellicott is the location of the oldest train station in the U.S. Right. This was actually exactly 220 days before the Jupiter locomotive float in the Rose Bowl parade sign, which was another train sign because it was the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad. But that's another sign that's actually explained in the
video I made regarding this parallel of signs in 2018 with the timing of events in the book of Joshua, so I won't explain it again. But it was another connection to confirm the train symbolism here, but it was the training storms, and it was the home of there's a museum in Ellicott, in fact. It's the oldest train station. The station is a museum. Okay. So the other sign we received was the Daytona 500. The 500th word in the Greek New Testament, Strong's G500, is the word for Antichrist. And that's why the number 500 symbolizes Antichrist. And this was the Daytona. It was not the Daytona 500. It was the Indianapolis 500 on this day. It was Memorial Day, this May 27th, 2018. And this was like the climactic sign of all of them, to the whole trail, including the signs on this day itself, too. It was the Indy 500, okay? Because the Indy 500, well, it began with the 3 sets of 7, okay? And that was the whole thing that was leading up to this Pentecost, was the 3 sets of 7 days count as well, for that matter. Because Joshua led the Hebrews around the walls of security 7 times over 7 days, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. And so at the beginning of the Daytona 500, they had the 7-gun salute that shot 3 times. There's the 3 sets of 7. And right after that, they blew the bugle, the horn, the trumpet. I mean, that's like the real trumpet is the bugle, right? They played the chaps, the military song, because it was Memorial Day, and so that was just amazing. The 3 sets of 7, and then the blast, because after the 3 sets of 7, the Hebrews blew the trumpets one last long trump sound, right, before the walls collapsed in judgment, and then. This Daytona 500, the big news story was how it was Danica Patrick's last Indy race. She was retiring. It was the end of her career. And she's the harlot. She symbolizes Rahab, the harlot, in the Joshua story, right? And, well, she ended her career with a crash into the wall. That's right, because in the book of Joshua, Rahab is rescued from the wall, right? And the Hebrews are rescued by Rahab also, and they are led down from the wall from her red scarlet rope. And so that's why the harlot, Danica Patrick, crashed into the wall after the 3 sets of 7 with the 7 guns 3 times in the bugle. It's just amazing. I had to go into that again for you. Okay, so another number that's from the Noah's flood account is the number 969. And that's another confirmation of these numbers here, all right? So exactly 969 days later was this January 19th date, 2021, a date on which prior to it we were expecting a Kamala Harris plane event. Turned out to be a prophetic sign instead. But this was the day, the last signs of Trump's presidency, God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet his signs, were these Air Force signs. On the 19th, he refused to send Biden and Harris an Air Force plane to pick them up and bring them to D.C., which is tradition, and so that's why it was a news story. And then after, the last sign of his presidency was him flying down on his Air Force One all the way to Florida past noontime while keeping the call signal Air Force One, which is something he wasn't supposed to do. Okay, so that's why we have this Air Force sign on the 19th. There's lots more to explain about this 19th and the relevance of that, but it was also the day of this windstorm that blew over old-growth trees in Yosemite National Park, which is paralleling this windstorm. It's just amazing. God uses the National Weather Service and their notifications and tweets in his signs, symbolizes national judgment, and the National Weather Service reported that the wind speeds of this rare freak windstorm, I believe they call it a mono winds, is the name of this type of storm in California, the mono winds.
it topped out at 110 miles per hour, which is truly astounding, and why it connects here in this diagram. Not only the day count as a second witness, but also, as we just mentioned, this connects with the Pentecost, which is the parallel with the timing of events in the book of Joshua. And the Joshua died at the age of 110. God uses the number 110 as one of the three most important numbers in his signs profusely to symbolize Joshua. And that's why this Pentecost day connects with this windstorm that was 110 miles per hour. It's just amazing. So this was a truly destructive storm. I believe it caused $2 million in damages to Yosemite National Park alone, and the communities around it as well. It caused lots of damage. And it blew over old growth trees in the famous Mariposa Grove, which is one of the most visited sites of all the national parks. And again, these old growth trees and these signs have been around for the duration of the existence of the nation of America. And so this is massive prophetic judgment warning, because again, as I said, fallen trees in the Bible symbolizes spiritual death and judgment. And so this is just amazing, because it's a windstorm that parallels this windstorm. This is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, my friends. That is being explained on this channel, and only this channel, okay? And I don't mean that in a hubristic way. It has nothing to do with me. So God pairs, again, the numbers 9 and 23. I don't know if I mentioned that in this video. He pairs the numbers 9 and 23 because they both symbolize judgment. The number 23 is the ninth prime number. G23 is the word for indignant, to be moved to indignation, very displeased. 23rd word in the Greek New Testament. And also, they both symbolize the identity of the Antichrist. They reveal the identity of the Antichrist. That's why they're paired together. Revelation chapter 12, the reason why the Revelation 12 chapter sign is on 923 is because it symbolizes judgment, and because Revelation chapter 12 talks about the Antichrist after the rapture. That's why these numbers are paired together. And so from the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash and then be replaced by the Antichrist, it is this 9 and 23 symbolism back, which connect in such profound ways, as I've explained now. The number 90, by the way, symbolizes the number 9, which symbolizes judgment. God uses the number 90 frequently to symbolize the number 9. And so there you have it, my friends. It's just amazing. And also, as was explained earlier in this video, God pairs the numbers 9 and 110 together. And this 90 days, which symbolizes the number 9, pairs or connects to the 110 wind speeds, this epic, symbolic, prophetic windstorm with 110 wind speeds. And again, this 90 days connects to this visit of Harris to High Point and promoting the $2.3 trillion infrastructure and jobs package. And in turn, this connects with 90 days to the prophetic plane crash on the 9th of Av, as was explained, and then also 3 sets of 90 days to the day that Kamala Harris will crash in her plane. So this Harris Air Force 2 plane sign here connects with 90 days and then 3 sets of 90 days to the day that she will crash in her Air Force 2 plane. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube.
you need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.